Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Tale of a Body Thief, Rovena Silvex, Book 1 by Kristy Centeno, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Rovena sped around a bend, barely avoiding clipping the corner of the apartment complex with her right shoulder. Her latest target had disappeared down a dark alleyway, reeking of filth and mold. The bastard was quick on his feet, but not enough to shake her. She rounded the corner moments after he did and stopped dead halfway down the alley. She'd momentarily lost sight of her mark, but the soft pulsations in the center of her hand were all the reassurance she needed that he was still there. Fiends generally blended well with the shadows. This one was no different. A quick scan of the alleyway revealed his hiding place by the rusty steel dumpster near the back door of the brick building to her left. Tendrils of black smog pressed tightly against the wall as if that alone would make him imperceptible. Clever, but useless. Few demons went through the trouble, preferring instead to charge her head-on and risk it all. Not that the attempt would help him. There was no hiding from her. Rovena Silvex possessed a rare ability, one her fellow hunters lacked. She could see demons regardless of what shape or form they took. Apparently, this newbie hadn't gotten the memo. Strands of dark swirls emerged and gave shape to a vaguely humanoid creature with long, spindly limbs and an oval head. A featureless face watched her. She could feel its indiscernible eyes following her every move. Rovena snagged the rod strapped to her right leg, curling her fingers tightly around the pole. A wave of fear wafted in her direction. She could sense its apprehension, but there was something else there too. Excitement, maybe. This demon was ready for the hunt. The figure gravitated toward her, inching its way along the wall. The pungent odor of sulfur wafted in her direction the second it moved, leaving a rancid taste on her tongue. Demons of the lowest ranks always smelled the worst. I can make this easier on you, Rovena's upper lip raised. Let's not drag this out. She brought the weapon up to her lips and whispered a quick spell. The runes engraved along the length of the stick blazed a brilliant hue of blue, illuminating the back of the alley like a spotlight for just a moment before it dwindled to a soft glow. The demon didn't try to flee, didn't move, gave no acknowledgement of her power coming to life. Apprehension carved a path through her veins, and just for a second before she stomped it down. Had she overlooked something? She lowered the bar to her side, absorbing the tiny vibrations of the magic it generated and reveling in the rush it gave her. So confident, Silvex. The garbled, inhuman voice came from behind her. We'll enjoy you when you finally make it down to our turf. It should have been a given that her target wasn't alone. Lower-level demons rarely left the slums of the underworld on their own. They usually hunted in packs, more innocent souls to harvest that way. Numbers represented safety. Demons stuck with what they knew. She should have done the same. That ain't going to happen anytime soon. Not if she could help it anyway. A warped chuckle followed her reply. A little birdie told me that might be quicker than you'd think. Rovena didn't take her eyes off the demon that led her to the alleyway. Its foggy tendrils pulled taut, but it remained in place. This one had yet to take a more substantial shape, preferring to linger as a shrouded figure vaguely resembling a glob. That birdie is bullshitting you. Demons love to engage in unnecessary chit-chat. Gave her time to assess the situation, but so far the odds were against her. Two demons had snuck up on her from behind. One kept to his post in front of her. The alley wasn't the most comfortable place to be trapped during a scuffle, but she'd been in worse and made it out with only a few scrapes and bruises. After all, one didn't get entombed in a car with a feral ghoul and come out unscathed. Similarities between that confrontation and this one were uncanny. And once again, location wasn't on her side. It wasn't often she walked blindly into a setup, but it only took a moment to recognize her mistake. Irritation shot through her. She was better than this. We'll see about that, another voice chimed in, this one much deeper but lacking the impatience of the first. The echo of muffled footsteps closing in behind her set off a burst of adrenaline. Quit the yapping. The clock kept ticking while the nuisance flapped their incessant gums. Waiting would only provide them more time to regroup. Give me your best shot, and it better be a good one. She turned to face the pair at her back. Two tall men blocked the exit to the alleyway. The one to the right was a bulky beast of an individual with broad shoulders and slanted eyes. Leaner and an inch shorter than his companion, the creature to the left was no less imposing. Demons came in all shapes and sizes. These had inherited a more humanoid build with properly proportioned limbs and average height. Humans, however, didn't possess reddish-purple skin, 2-inch talons, and fangs the size of her pinky, though the blackness that swallowed the iris was the most telling of all. Rovena acknowledged the individual to the right with a dip of her chin. You must be the leader of this poor excuse for a pack. You, Hunter, may call me Elor. Names held power in the demon world. Newbie or not, this one wasn't stupid enough to share valuable information with her. No demon would. Not that it mattered. She'd kick his ass with or without a name. Elor, huh? Rovena tapped the tip of her heeled boot on the asphalt. I'll make sure to write that down on your tombstone then. The man to the right scowled but didn't abandon his position. Neither did his partners. It would take a little more riling up to get them moving. Yet they were surprisingly patient. Damn. They came off as inexperienced and amateurish. A well-trained demon would know a hunter backed into a corner would never go down without a good fight. A smart demon would also bring weapons and expect to use them. As if on cue, the duo in front of her whipped out a set of miniature swords from behind them. The glint of the steel reflected off the windows to either side of the pair. Okay, so they weren't total idiots. You boys went through a lot of trouble to get me here. Recent attacks near St. Francis's Monastery were a bold attempt to attract attention from hunters, constantly rotating in and out of the place. Those responsible for the slayings knew where the Guild of Hunters' home base was. They made that clear by leaving a trail of mutilated bodies around the area for them to find. Rovena suspected that demons nested someplace near the monastery, but she had yet to locate a den. Tracking the demons had led her to a dead end a few blocks from the monastery. Who better than Rovena Silvex to ensure us a safety pass to the human plane? Ah, so it's me they expect to bestow the honor of sacrifice to. Why don't we find out if you really deserve that pass? She waved them over with a jerk of her left wrist. The duo in front jumped into action first, both darting in her direction with their blades held firmly in each hand. She wielded the rod, ready for the hit when it came. Heavy footsteps behind her confirmed the third was on the move and headed right at her. Sneaky bastards. Rovena held her position, waiting for the right moment to act. Spreading her legs, she pushed back her shoulders and raised her chin. The acerbic smell of sulfur intermingled with that of mold and rotting garbage, stinging her nostrils. She wrinkled her nose, concentrating on the approaching danger instead. Not yet. Excitement charged through her, readying Rovena for the fight to come. Footsteps closed in from both directions, the echo of their pounding feet bouncing off the brick walls. A beastly growl from behind her spurred her into action. Now. She sprinted to the left before the trio reached her and jumped on the brick wall. She used her momentum to propel herself up and over the men, somersaulting above their heads and landing silently behind them. The trio skidded to a stop and froze in place as their eyes struggled to catch up with her. Using the element of surprise to her advantage, she swung the rod in an arc. The base of the pole struck the demon to her right on the temple. He staggered, shrieking as contact with the magical runes set his skin ablaze. Dropping the weapon, he spun away from her. His hands flew to his face, and he frantically slapped at the symbols now gliding across his cheeks. Blue light charred a path beginning at the head and moving down the rest of his body. The larger demon dropped to the floor next to his discarded weapon and rolled onto his back. His spine arched as the runes buried deeper into his skin. Mouth agape and eyes wide, he writhed violently as holy fire consumed and reduced him to specks of dust in a matter of moments. The bulkier of the remaining demons pounced, snarling as he swiped left to right with his 6-inch dagger. The tip of the blade barely missed her elbow as she pivoted out of the way. Allowing the motion to carry her, Rovena swung the rod like a bat. It connected with the demon's head and sent him crashing onto the floor beside the burnt outline of his companion. Lifting the rod, she aimed it at the demon's chest. Arms strong as steel wrapped around her, trapping hers to the sides. Rovena cursed her carelessness as Elor hauled her off her feet and carried her farther into the alleyway. He didn't break stride, moving behind the dumpster and out of view. Rovena didn't struggle. Genuine curiosity over his intentions kept her compliant. If only until he shoved her against the cold container, hard. Her head slammed into the dumpster, bouncing off it. Stars swam in her line of vision. She dangled on the edge of consciousness for a moment before snapping back to reality. This bastard. His heavy breath fanned over the back of her neck, sending a cold rush down her spine. He pressed his lips momentarily against her skin before retreating. Rovena's mouth twisted as she bit back a curse. Her desire to beat the ever-living shit out of the demon escalated as he took liberties with her. His hold barely gave her any room to draw air into her lungs. If he squeezed hard enough, he could crack a rib or two. Underestimating a demon once had taught her a valuable lesson, one she didn't make a habit of forgetting. Delicious. Heat raced down her shoulder as jagged teeth sank into the base of her neck. The quick slurping sounds below her right ear turned her stomach. She wasn't opposed to a little fun during her hunts, but being turned into a midnight snack was a huge no-no for her. Throwing her head back, she smashed it against the side of the demon's face. The collision between her skull and his caused her teeth to chatter. She groaned as his mouth left her flesh. Pain ripped down her shoulder, momentarily numbing her fingers before feeling returned to them. Rovena raised her knees and planted her heels on the dumpster. She pushed with all her might, sending them both lurching backward. Elor collided with the wall behind them, his grasp slackening with the impact. She jerked herself free, dropping the rod, and swiveled, and threw a right hook at his lower jaw. The demon's head snapped to the side, blood spewed from his half-open mouth, crimson painted the floor in abstract patterns across the dark asphalt. She followed the punch with another jab to the side of his face that sent him sprawling to the ground. That's for biting me, fucker. She bent forward, curled her fingers in the fabric of the black top he wore, and hauled the man to his feet. I hate it when you guys play dirty. Dark eyes rose to meet hers. His lips twitched as if he were attempting to smile and not quite managing to pull it off. Best get used to it. Once you land in the underworld, there will be no saving you. A forked tongue slipped past his lips and swiped across his lower teeth. We would like nothing more than to get our hands on your kind. A knot formed in the pit of her stomach. She shouldn't ask. Nothing this demon said could be taken at face value. Rovena knew all this. Even so, she was compelled to say, my kind. Elor had the gall to chuckle, his shoulders quaking with the force of unprovoked amusement. Why don't you ask those who raised you? They have the answers you seek, Hunter. If his goal was to plant the seed of doubt, he did a good job of it. That she inherited magical abilities of unknown origins was no secret to her, but to suspect that Friar Ellen or any of the diakonos were more aware of her background than they'd let on was simply unacceptable. Just think, why would they not want you to know where you came from? The question sparked her ire anew, and she slammed him against the wall once more. Then talk. You rats are always eager to chatter away. Elor shook his head. You intend to return me to the underworld regardless. I have nothing to gain here. The scrape of metal against asphalt caught her ear, and she loosened her grip on Elor's shirt. In her haste to get even with the pack leader, she'd forgotten all about his companion. Faint footsteps creeping up behind her grounded Rovena immediately. Elor raised his gaze over her shoulder, prompting Rovena to act. She grabbed onto Elor and swung them both around. The rod shimmered as the blue runes engraved on its side came to life. The end of the pole descended and connected with Elor's left shoulder. Sparks coated his shirt, setting it ablaze as tiny hieroglyphs glided over his clothing and onto his reddish-brown skin. The howl that erupted from his throat was deafening, inciting Rovena to let go. She stepped back as he furiously whacked at the symbols in a futile attempt to stop them from spreading. Elor shrieked and spun around to face his companion. The same was caught in a crossfire of his own. The runes that had transferred onto Elor had also spread up the second demon's hands and arms. The second demon howled, dropped the rod, and slapped at his body in a pointless attempt to put out the runes. Elor lunged at his companion, and they hit the floor rolling. Their combined screams turned into a cacophony of squeals that made Rovena want to put a pencil straight through each ear. Should have warned you not to touch the rod. She gestured at her weapon where it lay abandoned on the asphalt. It's demon-proof. Her nose wrinkled as she caught a whiff of smoldering flesh. Sulfur lingered in the air as both demons burned to a crisp before her. It wasn't a smell she'd ever grow used to. Hell would be a nightmare on her senses. Dusting off the black particles clinging to her jacket, Rovena sauntered over to where the rod lay discarded and scooped it up. She strapped it to her leg, flicked her long hair over her shoulder, and walked down the alleyway in the direction she came from. Her car was in the same spot she'd left it, parked 5 blocks from the alleyway behind an Italian restaurant she was unfamiliar with. Rovena opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. Turning on the ignition, she lowered the rearview mirror and looked at the bite wound. The triangular, jagged marks on the base of her neck caused her temper to flare. The pest had pulled a fast one on her, though she had to admit that the actual bite wasn't what caused her to slap the steering wheel and wish it was Elor's head she was pummeling. Demons couldn't be trusted. What Elor had implied moments before the angel fire consumed him wasn't set in stone. She, of all people, knew well they lied. Yet a doubt crept up despite her best attempt to stomp it down. Rovena readjusted the rearview mirror, slipped off her jacket and top, and used the latter to wipe the blood dripping down her neck. The damage would heal by the time she reached the monastery, but that did little to pacify her growing irritation. The number of attacks near and around the monastery was an escalating problem that only seemed to worsen the more the hunters got involved. No solution had been put forward by the diakonos, though it was their job to decide how to best utilize the Guild of Hunters. Demons crawling out of the underworld and roaming the human plane as often as they did today meant there was a crack somewhere that needed mending, and quickly. More and more demons had accessed her world in recent times and were documented in the records of the crypt at the monastery. And many of those reports dated back hundreds of years. Rovena had brought up the subject before, but it was clear that something drastic was needed to make herself heard. Butchering those demons daring enough to access the surface wouldn't fix the problem in the long run, nor would it keep innocent people safe. The kill upon entering the human plane was customary for demons emerging for the first time and had become a common practice unlikely to change. How many people had to die before the diakonos assigned someone to search for that damn crack and seal it? She shook her head, tossed the bloody top on the floor of the passenger side, and reached behind her for the packed bag she kept in the back seat. Rovena pulled out a clean shirt from the valise and donned it. She was never one to play by the rules, so the lack of action by the diakonos spurred a need to launch her own investigation. As much as she loved her job, it didn't have to come at the expense of the innocent. Cooperating was getting her nowhere, fast. Something drastic had to be done, and she was just the kind of gal to speed things along. Rovena shifted gears and set her internal GPS to the monastery. Planning would have to wait until later. First order of business was reporting back to base and receiving her next assignment. Investigations were a good excuse to snoop around and stick her nose wherever the diakonos prohibited her to do so. Elor's words continued to bounce around her head as she drove up to St. Francis's Monastery, fueling her ire as well as her motivation to hunt for information.